Alright. I'm hoping that we're back on with Signum U and that y'all can hear me a little better this time. Just gonna get set up here. As much as possible. I've got my cat Gandalf here on my lap. I don't know if you can see him. He might pop up at some point. Say hi. My name again is Wesley Shantz. I am a auditor at Signum U. I take classes, but just for fun, and I volunteer and help out with different projects there, including the summer camps, which have evolved here into Signum Academy on Twitch and on the university website. You can check us out. Go to the Signum University site and look for the Academy link near the top. Now, a couple weeks ago, we talked a bit about the kinds of things that we offer at Signum Academy. All of our materials are on YouTube, and now a few of them are on Twitch as well. So there's a lot of video and audio. There's also a ton of great activities and games and creative sorts of crafting projects and things that are ways to bring the books to life. And to get a hold of those, you can just shoot us an email and we will send them right along. That's academy@signumu.org. Now, this time I wanted to share a little bit more about myself and the kinds of things that I'm particularly interested in talking about here. Again, we're going to try to do this every other week, so the first and third Mondays of every month. This month, the two meetings were set aside for introductions and this theme of new beginnings that we're going to carry through each of the following months to talk about one book in more detail. So this month we kind of gave an overview of all 4 books that we've addressed so far and looked ahead a bit to their sequels. Next month we're going to focus in on Tolkien. Oh yeah, the stream name, that was the thing that I was supposed to switch. I read that email, Druid's Fire, and I did not reply to it. I'm so sorry. I just replied to it. So I know that might take a minute to get sorted out. Yeah, so the last stream we did on Twitch was called Silmarillion Film Project something. It wasn't about the Silmarillion at all, or the film project that the Tolkien professor Corey Olsen does, which is really cool, but it's just not anything that I know about, so sorry about that if it's confusing to try to find it. Yeah, Druid's Fire is trying to figure that out for me. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is Signum Academy, and this is for readers of all ages, for young readers in particular, their parents and guardians, and anyone who wants to, again, take part in those kind of activities that are kind of fun. Oh, gotcha. That is appreciated. Yeah, so Druid's Fire is busy streaming some Lotro, so they're going to change the title for me manually, I guess. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm kind of a mess when it comes to technology, so maybe it'll take me a few times to get the hang of this Twitch thing. I mostly just like reading books, you know? That's what I really like to do. I've always loved reading books, and I brought a book here this time. Remembered to grab it. This is my copy of The Hobbit. It's a weird one. I don't know if you've ever seen one like this before. It actually it comes from the animated version. The illustrations in here, that is, come from the animated version. that is just a classic in its own right. The Arthur Rankin Jules Bass, as they put it here, the great animated film spectacle. The Hobbit, or There and Back Again. Of course, the book is by J.R.R. Tolkien, and the text, as far as I can tell, is... Thank you. Yeah, as far as I can tell, it's all there. I can't open the book to show you more. Unfortunately, it's so ripped apart that I've got it fastened with this piece of paper to keep it all there so it doesn't fall apart any worse. But they're beautiful images, and I highly recommend that you check out the movie if you've never seen it. So like I mentioned, each month we're going to kind of focus on a particular book, a particular sequel to the books that we've done so far, and all of the things that those books open up for us as readers. After we go through the Lord of the Rings, not entirely, but a little bit, at least the Fellowship of the Ring, and Prince Caspian, and the second Harry Potter, and the second book of the Wrinkle in Time Quartet, I think it's called, the Time Quartet. After we look at those each month, then we'll do a special kind of summer fun discussion of different adaptations, and particularly films, I think, is what we'll look at then. And then we'll try to organize some other cool community activities for the summer for the fan community out there for these books. And this time I did want to kind of tell the story of how I first got involved in reading these books, and maybe it would have some connections to the things that you've experienced too. So I think it was, let's see, I've even got a little PowerPoint that I wanted to show here, or some slides to go with this. So let's see if I can share that. See if something else to look at besides just me. I hope that doesn't show up too often. So I hope that you're seeing my slides here, and there they are. Cool. Yeah. So Signum Academy, again, our theme, New Beginnings. And I have this phrase that rattles around in my head of walking around reading books. Maybe not a phrase so much as an image. It comes from when I was really small. I don't even know how old I was, but in elementary school. And I remember seeing these kids that I looked up to because they were older, and they were the kids that I loved to play with outside, but they were faster than me, and they were funnier than me. They told great stories when we rode the bus. These were my neighbors, good friends of mine growing up. And I saw them in school one time. I don't usually see them in the school building, right? I see them at recess, I see them before and after school. But in the school building, they're off doing whatever mysterious things it is they do in their classroom. And I happened to see them walking in the halls. I think their whole class was going to the library, or maybe coming back from the library. And they were walking, and as they were walking, these kids were reading books. And that really blew my mind, because I couldn't imagine being able to both read and walk around at the same time. And this stunned me. They were walking down the stairs with their nose in a book. It was so incredible to me. I looked up to these kids no end, and I just wanted to be like them, And that image has always stuck with me. And I think there's something to it, like the thought that when you read, so often we're in our own little rooms and our own cozy houses, like hobbit holes, right? And that's fun too. It's great to have that time to yourself, and it'd be impossible to read, I think, if you're always surrounded by other people chattering away. But on the other hand, there's something to reading with other people, and reading in an active sense, being inspired to bring into the world the kinds of things that you learn from your reading, right? And that's what I think that phrase, walking around reading books, has come to mean for me. That image of seeing those kids going about their day on the one hand, and yet also being inside of a book at the same time. So being able to somehow balance both those aspects. I find that endlessly fascinating to think about. And so I wonder, what images or what phrases, what ways of thinking about reading have inspired you, have got a hold of your imagination. One way to ask this question is just what made you into a reader, or who? Was it a neighbor? Was it a friend? Older brothers, sisters, parents, guardians, grandparents, whoever it might be. What was it that first got you into reading? And what were your first favorite books to read? Those are the questions that I would like to hear back from you guys about. So just throw those out if you're there, if you're curious. Maybe we've got some of the same books in our background. The picture I put here is, of course, from the Lord of the Rings movies. Gandalf looking through the libraries deep in Minas Tirith, I think it is. He's a great figure for me too, of that person who's able to combine the reading and the activity. He, of course, is the wizard who inspires Bilbo Baggins and then later guides Frodo on their adventures. He is, of course, always got his staff and his cloak, his wizard's hat, and he's out there in the world bringing about great events. But it's because of all of his knowledge, right? Because of his wisdom that he's gained from reading. So when I was first introduced to Gandalf, it was a little later. I think it was after that time at school, and it was at a summer camp where I was supposed to be like playing sports all day, and we met in this big gymnasium to some other school in the area. All these kids crammed into the gymnasium, running around playing different sports and throwing basketballs and kicking soccer balls around. And that was when I first was reading The Hobbit. This copy of the book, right, that my dad gave me, which was his, and I would read it, in every spare moment that I had when I wasn't running around or, being thrown into dodgeball games or whatever. And I like playing sports a lot, but I really wanted to know what happened next to Bilbo and the dwarves and Gandalf. I wanted to get to the part where this dragon would appear in the story, and whoever designed this book did something fancy where they took this picture of Smaug and pasted it onto, photoshopped it onto a picture of the dwarves traveling through the Misty Mountains during the storm. But of course, Smaug is not in the Misty Mountains. He's over at the Lonely Mountain. But anyway, so I wanted to get through Mirkwood and meet the dragon. But it took me a long time. It's a hard book when you're in third grade. I don't know when you first read The Hobbit or any of these other books, or if you remember what it was like, but I remember really going through a lot of new words on every page of text, having to kind of figure out like what could that, what could it be, just based on the stuff in the story I did understand. I got to the point where I knew the story pretty well eventually, and I always wanted, though, so this image that I've got on my slide here is from Dungeons and Dragons. There was these other kids at the camp that summer who, instead of reading books, would be playing this really interesting looking board game, like nothing I had ever seen before. And they were older kids again, but I didn't know them. And they, had a full group or whatever, they didn't have any time to spare for me, but I would kind of peer over their shoulders at what they were doing on their Dungeons and Dragons game, and I remember that they had the characters that they had invented. They'd rendered them as Lego figurines. They had these little Lego people, and they'd stick them on these Lego boards, so that they could, I don't know, visualize better what they were doing. I didn't understand anything about the game, but I thought it was just the coolest thing. They had the dice with all the sides to them. They would talk about casting spells to do things in the room and fight monsters and whatnot. And finding treasure. I just thought that was so cool. And it's only a lot later that I realized Dungeons and Dragons, of course, is based on Tolkien's stories. The Lord of the Rings was in the background of a lot of the original designers of D&D. That's something that makes sense to me now, but if only I'd known it at the time, right? I could have showed them my book that I had and convinced them to let me play with them and teach me how to play. Still to this day, I have never managed to join a Dungeons and Dragons game, so that's still on my list of things I want to accomplish one day, is to play D&D with someone. So maybe that's something that you know a lot about. I don't know, other games, other sports, or maybe playing music, playing instruments, stuff like that. I'm curious, what other things do you really love to do? And going back to that idea of walking around reading books, and this little connection between Dungeons and Dragons and J.R.R. Tolkien, what kind of overlaps maybe do you see between those activities? I feel like there's probably something that connects anything that you really love to do. It might tell you something about your personality, right? If you love to both play the piano and play video games, right? That might say something about the kind of person you are, that you're dedicated to practicing music, right? And you have an eye for patterns and for beauty. You have an ear for it, rather. And you also like to have that kind of visual action, right, that you get from video games. I don't know. That's just an example. I'm not really very good at playing video games or playing the piano, so I just throw that out there for you. The kind of person I am actually is the sort of person who likes to try and get into lots of different things, right? So I sort of have practiced the piano a little bit, and I have played a lot of video games a little bit, but I've never really dug in and become a pro at anything, right? So that's why I'm on Twitch talking about some books that I like with you, instead of playing Fortnite or whatever the popular game is now. If I had a better computer, I would definitely try to stream playing games at some point. I think that would be fun. I'll try to upgrade and get to that point one day. But there's also the possibility, right, that if you like different things, that there could be some conflicts between those things too. Maybe it isn't so easy to both be a great football player or basketball player and also be a great video game designer, right? If you really put in the time to become good at something, it's what do they say, 10,000 hours or whatever the number is, right? It takes an immense amount of time and attention, and it's difficult to spread out your deep enjoyment of too many different things. I mean, there's definitely a trade-off there. I have learned a little bit of a lot of different languages. I have played a little bit of a lot of different instruments, but I could never perform with any one instrument in a concert, really. I can get by, speaking different languages, but I don't think anyone would ever think I was fluent in any of them except English on a good day, right? So it's possible there are some conflicts there, and that's something to think about too. It's hard to read a book while playing soccer, for example. You've got to find a little bit of a spot for each of those things in your day. So that brings me to a closely related activity, which I hope some of you guys are also interested in, which is writing. A lot of people at Signum are aspiring artists and writers, especially. I'm hesitating over whether I should. Oh gosh. Who's tonight's lecturer? My name's Wesley Shantz. I hope that this is. Oh gosh, I hope this is transmitting to you guys. Yeah. Again, for Signum Academy. I have written a lot of stories in. Cool. Yeah, I have written a lot of stories, and I haven't finished most of them. But I love writing. I want to be. Yeah, that's me. Got it. Okay, cool. I wanted to be a writer for a while, but I wasn't able to really put in the time. I got distracted, learning Spanish and traveling in Spain and making all kinds of friends with people around the world. I got more interested in teaching at that point, teaching English in Uruguay, in Mexico, and now back here in the States, and interested in learning. So those are things that, again, it's hard to find time to do everything that you love, but I think that writing is one of those things that is especially difficult, maybe, unless you can find a good community of supporters, people who kind of encourage you. It can be tough to stick with it because it is so difficult. That's been what I found, at least. Whenever I'm, around other people who are also interested in writing, then I kind of get back into it. Lately, I've been writing a lot about books, but I've got some stories of my own going too. And I'll talk about one of those books in a minute. But I think that there's something about writing that people need to gather in the same place and do it with one another from time to time. This was something that Tolkien found to be the case, and Lewis. They had their Inklings group that would meet, and they would share their stories and progress and challenge one another and critique one another. And they were great friends, but they would not hold back either. That kind of give and take is really important to improve at something, right? That's how you practice, how you challenge yourself. And I think that we see this actually in Harry Potter really nicely too, right? They gather in a school to learn magic. It's very different than other depictions of where magic comes from in stories. It's, actually very ordinary in a way. That's, what we do every day is go to school, not usually to learn spells. But maybe it is actually, if I could share just another anecdote from when I was a kid. I mean, me and my friends would get together and write these stories on the computer at school in our free time. And we just thought it was the coolest thing. It was like an old Apple Macintosh computer that had a program on it that you could copy these images. It had like a stock of images you could pick from, and you could put them into your story. And they had ones like of wizards and knights and dragons and stuff. And so we would write these stories, and then we'd put our pictures in there, and print them out on those old, the old Xerox paper. I don't know if you have ever seen something like that, but it's got these dots along the edge for it to go through the machine. So I find the process of writing really interesting, and so I put this image here. Talked about Harry Potter a little bit, talked about school computers a little bit, but of course this comes from an old scriptorium, right? The place where the scribes would write out and copy out old books and preserve them, and they saved a lot of literature from being destroyed, right? They made it beautiful. They put these illuminations, right, with the gold leaf, the images. Of course, they couldn't simply drag and drop those things. They really painstakingly worked at it, and have these beautiful books that preserve learning, right? The kind of thing that Gandalf was reading in Minas Tirith, right? So if writing is something that you love to do, if you have stories you're working on and want to share them, that's something that we're interested in as well. So I mentioned a few times video games. It's something that's on my mind a lot. It's also a big part of how I learned to read, was playing video games, actually. Got a picture here from Super Nintendo version of The Lord of the Rings. It says Volume 1. I don't know if they ever got around to continuing it. I think that this game maybe got as far as the Mines of Moria or so. At any rate, it didn't. It couldn't be called The Lord of the Rings because it didn't tell the whole story. I know that when I played it, I didn't get out of the Shire. I think I couldn't figure out how to get past the Black Riders. I wasn't very good at the game, obviously. But I did play a lot of video games. I played a lot of Final Fantasy games. These were things that my neighbors, right, the kids who would walk around reading books, they were really great at Super Mario and at Final Fantasy. And so I learned how to play from them. And I learned a lot of, again, just sort of the enjoyment of reading from playing those games. They were heavy on text. You had to read and understand what people were telling you to figure out what to do next in those games. And eventually, obviously, video games have gotten a little more sophisticated. You can play Lord of the Rings online, like Druid's Fire is doing right now. You can play, of course, like the Lego Hobbit and Lord of the Rings games, which are pretty fun. I don't know. So whatever games it might be that you like to play, I'm curious to hear what your favorite games are. I don't know that much about what's popular nowadays. But I think you'll find that even if it's not called The Lord of the Rings, if you play any of those sorts of games, those D&D type games, of course, advanced and on electronic devices, on screens now. But if you play any of that stuff, you might find that it does go back to Tolkien and to the kinds of things that Tolkien read, right? His fairy tales, his myths, to stories that were preserved by the scribes in their monasteries, right? Handed down and preserved from Viking invaders and barbarian hordes and whatnot. Those kinds of things have made it. They've made it through some of the kinds of things that we see happening in these books, right? Wars, invasions, terrible misguided leaders who destroy their own people. all of that is sort of part of the obstacles, right, that these books have navigated through to get to us today. And sorry, I'm trying to catch up on what people might be saying here, but my computer went to sleep, so I've got to wake it up. I wonder now, if these kind of games will still be preserved in the years to come, or if they will prove to be less to have less staying power than the books that they're based on. So at some point, it's not entirely a joke that I want to stream some games, but they would be these classic games, right? They'd be Super Nintendo games and old Final Fantasy games and things that I learned a lot from, that I want to share with people. But again, I want to know what games you would be interested in seeing and reading and really delving into, the way that you can delve into these great books. That's something that I am super interested in. So this brings me to my last point, about fantasy series. There's endless options out there for what book you want to read next. And again, I just want to thank everyone who's shared their time to read these books. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Madeleine L'Engle, and J.K. Rowling. To pick something that isn't the newest thing necessarily, but that has proved to have that staying power, to draw on things that are deep and have a rich heritage to them and a tradition, right, that has been handed down. You don't even have to know that when you pick up these books. I think when you read them for the first time, you can feel that there's something different about them compared to, I don't know, whatever less interesting book you might be able to think of, right? Whatever book might have been assigned for you to read in school that you just didn't get into. Hopefully whatever they're assigning you in school is like these books, like really interesting and has some substance to it, has something to say, that isn't just, riding whatever the current bandwagon or popular thing might be. There's a book here in this picture that I took it from someone else's blog. Sorry I didn't give the name of that person. I should have, but I'll correct that next time. They made a nice kind of collage here, or maybe they got it from somewhere else, I'm not sure. But I like it because it includes 3 of our main books, right? We can see Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, Prince Caspian, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, a couple months, I guess. A Wrinkle in Time with its Newbery seal, right? Definitely one that you can find in your school library, I imagine, if you haven't read it yet. Great book. And here, along with the series of unfortunate events, which I haven't read yet, is this book called The Golden Compass, which I definitely have read, and which I think is just great. I think it's probably still my favorite book. And I have been talking about it a lot lately in a podcast that I do, kind of on my own, not with Signum, but definitely inspired by Signum, inspired by the Tolkien professor. I started making my own podcast about my favorite book, The Golden Compass. Its other title in the UK and maybe other places, I'm not sure, is Northern Lights, or maybe just Northern Lights. Maybe there's no the in there. Yeah. Anyhow, it's by Philip Pullman. Here's his name over here. It's an excellent story, and it's book 1 of a series. All of these books on this picture, right, of course, are part of series, and fantasy series. They involve events which are remarkable, extraordinary, magical, fantastic. I don't think it's necessary to have those kind of events in your book to make it interesting, but it is a way of connecting back to those older stories, right? Those myths, those fairy tales and legends. When you include something like a hippogriff, right, or a talking bear, right, a star who takes on a human form to speak to human beings, right? When you do something like that in your story, it opens up that older world of beliefs and potentially even rituals, right? Ancient kinds of magic, right? That people really don't believe in so much anymore. I guess some people do, but that still are in the background of a lot of the ways that we see the world and talk about the world. And they certainly make your story interesting. There's something about, right, having a prince rather than just an ordinary peasant, or a peasant who becomes a prince, realizes he's a prince, right? There's something about that shape of story and that kind of image that really connects for people. And so in The Golden Compass, Philip Pullman does something really kind of remarkable, where he's taking a version of the Garden of Eden story, right? The story of the creation and the beginning of human beings, and he retells it in a parallel universe. He is very upfront about doing this because he takes some lines of poetry from John Milton's Paradise Lost and he puts them in the front of his book, right? And he calls his series His Dark Materials. It's a phrase that comes from that poet and from Paradise Lost. That's the stuff that God used to create everything in the story. In the version that Milton tells, it's a kind of chaos, right? Unformed matter bouncing off, fire, water, wind, all sort of mixed together. And in Pullman's story, this has a real powerful effect on the imagination of this character, Lyra. Her uncle, Lord Asriel, comes and tells the scholars about his discoveries in the north. And he shows them these pictures of this substance, this light they call dust, that's lighting up the sky and the people in the photos, and that through which you can see this other world. And that's what he wants to go and investigate. And that is the dust, right? The matter that is pouring into the everyday world that that we want to discover more about, along with Lyra. She goes on her whole adventure to see this place that he has brought her this picture of, right? And of course she's hiding. She's not supposed to be there when he's showing the scholars, but he catches her because she saved his life. So she deserves, I think, to get to see and to get to go. But anyway, if you haven't read those books, I strongly recommend them. If you're interested in them, we'll talk about them no end. At some point, I think I'd like to develop some more activities and games and things like we've done with A Wrinkle in Time and Harry Potter and the others, based around Philip Pullman. He's got a really different approach in some ways to the story. He reads the story of the Garden of Eden. He reads Milton along with another poet, William Blake. He reads them from a standpoint that is pretty controversial. He stirs up controversy, I think, on purpose with things that he says outside of his books, as well as things that he says in the books. So, you might want to just check with mom and dad first if it's okay for you to read these books. They do have some pretty intense scenes in them, and stuff that will definitely make you think. I think that if you stick with them, the place that they bring you is one that is extremely positive and affirming of whatever you might believe about those stories, because it is such a great telling of the story. The characters, the settings, the ideas, the inventions that Pullman has are just amazing. They have really made me, probably more than any other book, they've made me into the person that I am. And so I'm very grateful to these books. I wouldn't have read The Golden Compass, though, if I hadn't read The Hobbit, because, again, my dad gave me this Hobbit copy that had been his, and encouraged me to read it and read it with me. And then he gave me The Golden Compass, too, when I was a little older. When The Golden Compass first came out, he got it for me because, he had read, if you love fantasy, then you're going to love this book, right? So the whole idea of these great fantasy series, right, which are so popular now, it wouldn't really be possible without the space that The Hobbit and Narnia kind of opened up in readers' imaginations, and in the shelves of booksellers, right, bookshops. They're out there because these books were so beloved. So maybe The Golden Compass isn't really your favorite, or maybe you have just a different favorite book as far as more modern or contemporary, current, popular books, things that you're really interested in. I'm curious to hear what those are and how you found them. I would venture to guess, right? Like me, you probably read one book and see that some other book has been compared with it, favorably. You say, if you like that, then you should try this. That is this idea, I think, of the tradition, right? In a small way, of a book or a story, or just that little image, that idea for a story that gets handed on, that gets passed along, that makes its way, right? That somehow moves from the past into the present and into the future. We are, I think, responsible as readers. It's up to us to make sure that those stories live on. We don't have to copy them by hand. If your book is falling apart, maybe you have to do a little bit of work on it and repair it, right? But I don't mean like the physical copy now, but we do in a way have to take in those stories and those images, make them a part of ourselves, and then share them in a new form, right, with a new spin, to make them available to more people in the future. That is basically the idea here at Signum Academy. I gave you kind of an overview last time. Again, I apologize for the audio last time. I hope this time has gone a little smoother, at least. It's been a little easier to follow. I hope that my images have shown up okay for you guys to follow along with something other than my face there in the corner. I hope that my face is there for you to see at least too. And to put a name with the face again, Wesley Shantz, that's me. My cat Gandalf is over there now. He's sleeping. Maybe he'll make an appearance one of these days. And some of our other teachers. We'll try to get them involved as well on the Twitch or on other videos or audio that we can make available to go along with the resources that we've already got. Again, send in recommendations for things that you would like to see, for books that you would like to have discussed, or video games, or old board games, right? Whatever it might be that connects back to the worlds of Middle-earth and Narnia. And let us know how we can best kind of put those together for you, for your class or your group, your reading group, or just for you personally. If you don't have other people to read with and talk to, that's what we're here for. And if you do have other people, we want to provide you with really great stuff to use and to draw from. So shoot us an email, academy@signumu.org. I hope that that's the right email address. If not, it's definitely on the website. So if you go to Signum U and search around on the top bar, you'll see the Academy webpage, and sort of check out the stuff that we've got there, and you'll see all the ways to contact us on there. I hope that I didn't forget anything. Yeah, I think that about does it for this time and for January. Of course, we're meeting on Martin Luther King Day. That's pretty important. So maybe you're off school today. I hope that you did a little bit of reading of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches and other works to commemorate it. I hope that you didn't just read, right, but got out and did something in your community, some kind of service or whatever it might be to commemorate his legacy. That's, another version of what I've been trying to talk about with balancing being active, walking around, playing, whatever it might be, and reading, thinking, talking about books, bringing those things together in a constructive way. Besides commemorating Dr. Martin Luther King today, I guess I really should also mention, if you haven't heard, Christopher Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien's son, has passed away just recently. He was an incredibly important part of making Tolkien's work as popular and as well loved as it is. He, maybe most significantly, was responsible for bringing out all of the unpublished papers that Tolkien had been working on, right? Primarily the Silmarillion, which for a while there this was listed as being a talk about the Silmarillion. It is, alas, not. I have read that book. I highly recommend it. If you've never tried it, don't be discouraged. It is so worth pushing through, even though it's kind of hard at sometimes. The Silmarillion is a great book. Christopher Tolkien was the main editor of J.R.R. Tolkien's works, and really put that into a form that people could read. He did the same for a lot of the drafts of The Lord of the Rings and a lot of other stories and things that his dad was working on. So, just again to pay our respects to Christopher Tolkien with gratitude for all of his great contributions. So sorry that I left that to the end. I knew I really should have mentioned those things a little sooner. Again, for next time, I'll try to be better about saying where I get my images from, so that nobody feels like I've stolen something from them. I definitely don't want that. But I do hope that there's something interesting in these ideas about different approaches to these fantasy books, and to the kinds of things that you can do with them. So I'll let you guys go. Thanks again for all of your time, all of your ideas, and I look forward to see you guys in the first Monday of February. Till then, take care.